My name is Mara Whitcomb. I'm 32. On a Wednesday morning in late August, my parents hauled me into court for not giving them enough money. That was how it felt, anyway. The official paperwork said, failure to provide reasonable financial support to dependent aging parents. It sounded clean that way. Almost respectable. Like I had left two helpless old people sitting in the dark while I spent my paycheck on vacations and handbags. But I was standing there in a gray blazer I had bought on clearance 3 years earlier, holding a folder of pharmacy receipts, utility bills, and bank statements that nobody on their side of the courtroom wanted to admit existed. My father, Leonard Whitcomb, sat across from me, with his hands folded on the table. He wore the same expression he used when I was a teenager and had disappointed him by breathing too loudly. My mother, Celeste, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue before anyone had said anything sad. My older brother Brent sat behind them, staring at his phone, dressed like a man who had never been expected to clean up his own mess. Beside them was Graham Pritchard, their family care consultant, calm, silver-haired, and expensive-looking. He had a leather binder in front of him. I had a folder from the dollar store. Their attorney stood first. He told the judge my parents were aging, frightened, and financially strained. He said I had a stable job and no children. He said I had refused to do my duty. Duty. That word landed harder than the lawsuit. Then Judge Rosalie Vance looked down at the file, then up at me. Her face changed so slightly, I almost missed it. "Miss Whitcomb," she said slowly, "you don't remember me, do you?" The courtroom went still. I swallowed. "No, Your Honor. I'm sorry, I don't." She leaned back. 7 years ago," she said. "Prairie Ridge Rehabilitation Center. You were wearing blue scrubs that night." And suddenly, my parents weren't the only people in that courtroom hiding something. If I guessed correctly, type 3 in the comments. Let's see how many viewers I got right. Your support helps us continue creating more meaningful, emotional, and captivating stories for you. All right, enough talking, let's begin the story. For a second, nobody moved. My mother's tissue stayed pressed beneath one eye, but the tears stopped coming. My father's hand tightened around the edge of the table, his knuckles whitening just enough for me to notice. Graham Pritchard stopped writing. That was the first thing that made my stomach pull tight. Since the moment he walked in, he had been taking notes as if my life were a form he could complete in black ink. But when Judge Vance said Prairie Ridge, his pen froze above the page. I should have remembered her. I tried. I searched her face, the way you search an old drawer for something you know used to be there. The silver hair was different, the black robe changed everything. But there was something in her eyes, some old fear folded behind authority, that made the back of my neck go cold. Before I could answer, she looked away from me and spoke to the courtroom in a formal voice. She said she needed to make a disclosure. Years earlier, she explained, she had encountered me under circumstances unrelated to the present case. Because of that prior contact, she could not continue without creating even the appearance of bias. My father sat straighter. "Your Honor, that won't be necessary," he said, as if courtroom procedure were just another family boundary he could push through. Judge Vance did not look at him. "Mr. Whitcomb, it is necessary." Then she recused herself. Just like that, the hearing ended before it truly began. No ruling, no victory, no dismissal. My parents did not lose, and I did not win. But as Judge Vance gathered her papers, she paused over the file one last time. "Before I step away," she said, "the next judge may want to look carefully at the billing materials attached to this petition." Her voice stayed even, but Graham slid one document back into his stack before I could see the label. In the hallway, my father walked past me without stopping. Celeste leaned on Brent like she had survived an attack. Graham kept his voice low, telling their attorney they would reframe the presentation for the next hearing. I stood there with my folder against my chest, feeling the old shame rise in me, the kind that had trained me to apologize before I knew what I had done wrong. But beneath that shame, something else had started moving. Why would a judge who remembered me from 7 years ago notice a billing record? And why did Graham Pritchard look afraid when she said it? The question followed me all the way back to February, to my mother's 64th birthday dinner at a family restaurant off University Avenue, all laminated menus and brown booths. I arrived 12 minutes late because a patient at Prairie Ridge had fallen during a transfer exercise, and I stayed until the incident report was finished. I walked in with my hair slipping loose from its clip, carrying a small white bakery box in one hand and a pale blue shawl in the other. My mother looked at the shawl like it was something she had to be polite about. "That's pretty," she said, not unkindly, but not warmly either. Brent leaned back and checked his watch. "Big night at the rehab center?" he asked. A few cousins laughed because Brent had always known how to make my work sound small. My father didn't say it was fine. He only looked at the empty chair beside him and said, "Your mother only turned 64 once." I sat down quietly. That was what I did in my family. I made myself smaller, until the room could forgive me for taking up space. Nadine Mercer, our old neighbor, gave me a gentle nod from the far end of the table. Then Graham Pritchard introduced himself. Soft hands, calm smile, a voice that made pressure sound like planning. "Your parents have spoken very highly of you," he said, though his eyes had already decided otherwise. Halfway through dinner, Graham placed a folder beside my father's water glass. Leonard rested his hand on it like a pastor touching a Bible. "We need to talk as a family," he said. My mother lowered her eyes. Brent stopped scrolling. Graham began explaining something called a family care contribution plan, using words like sustainability, aging support, and shared responsibility. He never once said debt. He didn't have to. My father looked straight at me and said, "Mara, we cannot keep pretending you are doing enough." The table went silent in that careful way families go silent when they are willing to watch someone get hurt, as long as they are not asked to stop it. "Dad, I paid Mom's prescriptions last week," I said. My mother's mouth tightened. "Please don't discuss private things in public." Brent gave a short laugh. "Maybe if you came around more, you wouldn't need receipts to prove you care." Nobody corrected him. Not my father, not my mother, not the cousins who had eaten the birthday cake I brought. I looked at the shawl still folded beside my mother's plate, untouched, the tag tucked under like evidence she did not want admitted. I wanted to mention the electric bill in December, the copay in January, the insurance payment Leonard had forgotten. Instead, I swallowed it, because my mother had begun pressing her fingers to her chest, and everyone was watching me as if I had caused the pain. My father leaned closer and said, "A decent daughter helps before her parents have to ask." That was when I understood they were no longer asking. They were building a case. 3 days after that dinner, I drove to my parents' rental in Ankeny. I was taking my mother to a cardiology follow-up. She had called the night before and said she no longer felt comfortable driving on the interstate. I left work early, used the last 2 hours of paid time off I had saved, and arrived just before 1. My father's truck was in the driveway. Brent's SUV sat at the curb, though he was nowhere in sight. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner. My mother was in the bedroom changing her blouse, calling through the wall that she needed 5 more minutes. My father was outside, arguing with someone on the phone about an invoice. I stood in the kitchen beside a sink full of rinsed mugs and my mother's pill organizer. That was when I saw the yellow folder on the table. Graham's company name was on the front. I did not open it. I need to say that because later my father called it snooping, as if curiosity were a crime only I could commit. A page had already slid out far enough for me to see my name near the top. Not Mara, not daughter, not emergency contact. My full legal name, Mara Elise Whitcomb. The title beneath it read, Family Financial Responsibility Agreement. I leaned closer before I could stop myself. A few phrases caught my eye, one after another. Responsible adult child. Monthly contribution. Care-related debt. Silver Hollow Senior Living. I had heard that name once from my mother, always vaguely, always as a place Graham suggested. Nobody had told me they were building paperwork around it. Nobody had told me my name had become part of their options. The back door opened. My father came in fast, phone still in his hand. His eyes moved from me to the folder, and something hard crossed his face. "What are you doing?" he said. I straightened. "Why is my name on that?" He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and snatched the folder off the table. "Don't go through your mother's private papers," I said. They were on the table. He held the folder against his chest. "Your name is on them because you are part of this family." That was how my father always did it. He turned a question into an accusation, then wrapped it in our family ties. My mother appeared in the hallway, one earring in, and the other in her hand, her face already set in exhaustion. "Please don't start," she said. I told her I only wanted to know why there was a financial agreement with my name on it. She looked at my father before she answered. "Graham is helping us understand what support might look like." In the car, she clutched her purse on her lap and watched the houses slide by as if each had wronged her. We drove 3 miles before she spoke. "If Graham asks," she said quietly, "just tell him you understood everything that day." I kept my eyes on the road. "What day?" She turned toward the window. "I don't want to argue." The blinker clicked between us. Once, twice, 3 times. At the clinic, she smiled at the receptionist like nothing had happened. I sat beside her under the fluorescent lights, holding her insurance card, still feeling the weight of my full name on a document I had never been given. By the time the nurse called her back, I understood the folder was not an accident. It was a warning, and whatever that day was, someone had already decided I had agreed to it. In May, the warning became real. A certified envelope arrived at my apartment on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I remember the sound it made when it slid through the mail slot, heavier than a bill, too formal to be anything kind. I stood in my entryway with my work shoes still on, holding the envelope and reading my own name through the little plastic window. Inside was a letter from an attorney I did not know, demanding immediate repayment or my signature on a structured contribution agreement within 14 days. The amount listed was $118,400. I read it once standing up. Then I sat on the floor and read it again, because my knees had stopped trusting me. The pages behind the letter broke the number into pieces. $46,700 for Silver Hollow Senior Living, $28,900 for a personal loan in my father's name, $17,600 in consulting fees paid to Graham Pritchard, $14,300 in credit card charges, and $10,900 in medical and pharmacy expenses. Neat columns, dates, invoice numbers. My name printed as the adult child responsible. I called my mother first. Not because she was safer, but because I still wanted one of them to be. "Mom," I said, "I just got a letter saying I owe you and Dad over $100,000. There was a pause. Then she exhaled like I had finally found something she had been waiting for me to find. "Mara, this is what happens when parents get old and their children look away." I closed my eyes. "I haven't looked away. I paid for your prescriptions. I covered the electric bill." Her voice changed. It became smaller, which somehow made it sharper. "Those things were kind, but kindness is not the same as responsibility." Then I heard my father in the background. A chair scraped. The phone shifted. "You received the letter?" he asked. No hello, no surprise, just confirmation. "I received a demand for money I do not owe," I said. My father's voice hardened. "You owe more than you think." I drove to their house that evening, with the letter on the passenger seat. Brent was at the kitchen table eating a sandwich, his new SUV key fob beside his plate. I looked at it, then at the personal loan listed in the packet. Something inside me went very still. "Is that what the loan was for?" I asked. Brent turned the key fob over with his thumb and refused to look at the page. "Don't start," he said. My father stepped between us. "Your brother is trying to rebuild his business." I laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because my body did not know what else to do with the insult. "So he rebuilds, and I repay?" My mother folded into the chair as if the conversation itself had made her weak. Graham joined by video call 5 minutes later, framed by bookshelves and warm office lighting. "No one wants this to become public," he said. "If you sign, your parents can withdraw the more painful claims." I looked at my parents. "Painful for who?" Graham smiled without warmth. "No one wants a public record suggesting you abandoned your parents." My father nodded like Graham had translated his disappointment into something legal. My mother stared at the table. Brent kept turning the key fob under his thumb. And I understood then that the debt was not the only thing they were asking me to carry. They wanted me to carry the shame, too. I picked up the packet and stood. "I'm not signing this tonight." My father's face darkened. "Then don't act surprised when the court explains duty to you." At the door, my mother whispered, "You're making us do this." I looked back at the three of them, and at Graham's calm face glowing from the laptop screen. For the first time, the fear in me had company. It had anger beside it. Because that $118,400 was not a request for help. It was the price they had put on my silence. I did not sign that night. I drove home with the packet beside me, no longer just a threat but something I needed to understand. Once inside, I cleared the little table by my window and spread every page out under the yellow desk lamp. My apartment was quiet, except for the refrigerator humming and rain tapping the glass. For the first time, I stopped asking myself what kind of daughter refuses. I started asking what kind of paperwork needs a daughter too scared to read it carefully. I opened a blank spreadsheet and made a timeline. That was something I understood from work. When a patient declined, we did not guess. We documented dates, symptoms, medication changes, who was in the room, who signed what. So I wrote down everything I could verify. The birthday dinner in February, the folder on my parents' kitchen table, the certified letter in May, every pharmacy receipt, every transfer, every utility bill I had covered. By midnight, the total I had already paid sat in one cell on my screen, $23,600. Seeing that number did not make me proud, it made me cold. Not because I regretted helping, but because they'd turned every quiet favor into a story that erased the facts I could show. I pulled bank statements and old texts. I saved screenshots of prescription pickups and the message from my mother thanking me for covering her copay in January. The next morning, I called 3 attorneys from my car during lunch. 2 wanted retainers I could not touch. The third gave me the number for legal aid. That was how I found Elias Boone. His office was on the second floor of a brick building that smelled like old paper and burnt coffee. He did not promise me anything. He read the demand letter twice, then looked over his glasses and said, "We do not win by proving you are a good daughter. We win by proving their numbers are false." Elias told me to request every document that carried my name or signature. A week later, Graham's office sent a scanned copy of the agreement. I stared at the date first, the 19th of May, 2026. Then the time, 3:40 p.m. My hands stopped moving. I knew that day. I had worked a 12-hour shift at Prairie Ridge, and at 3:40 I was not in Graham Pritchard's office signing anything. I was in the rehab gym, completing a safety report my supervisor later signed after a transfer went wrong. I sat back from the laptop and listened to my own breathing. For weeks, they had made me feel like the question was whether I loved my parents enough. But that timestamp changed the question. It was no longer about love. It was about where I was, what I could prove, and who had decided my name could be used when I was not in the room. All right, folks, let's get back to the story now. I shut the tab and tried to focus on the facts again that morning. I logged every receipt and every call. I kept copies in a folder. Then I started saving every message. I filled a spreadsheet, pulled bank statements, and kept everything there that could prove I had been helping. That winter, I paid $23,600 out of my own account. I closed the laptop and tried to sleep. Now, let's begin the story. The question stayed open for 2 months. I did not confront Graham. I did not call my parents and accuse them of anything. I kept going to work, kept smiling at patients, kept answering my mother's calls when I had the strength. But I saved everything. Every voicemail, every text, every email where my father used the word duty like a leash. I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, I could let the paperwork speak before they knew I had learned its language. Then, on Monday, August 3rd, the sheriff's deputy knocked on my apartment door. He was polite. That almost made it worse. He confirmed my name, handed me the papers, and said I had been served. I stood in the doorway in my socks, holding a civil petition filed by Leonard and Celeste Whitcomb against their own daughter. The language was colder than anything my father had ever said out loud. Failure to provide reasonable financial support. Neglect of family responsibility. Refusal to participate in care planning. By lunchtime, my phone would not stop vibrating. My mother had sent an email to relatives with the subject line, "Please pray for our family." She copied everyone except me. She wrote that I had turned my back on them when they became inconvenient, that they had tried everything privately before being forced to seek help through the court. She did not mention the $23,600. She did not mention Brent's loan. She did not mention the agreement I had never signed. Messages came in from cousins I barely spoke to. One aunt wrote, "I hope one day you understand what your parents sacrificed." Another relative said, "I never thought you'd make them sue you just to survive." I read those words in the supply closet at Prairie Ridge, with boxes of gloves stacked beside me, and my badge still clipped to my pocket. I pressed my fist against my mouth, so no one in the hall would hear me breathe. That evening, I drove to Ankeny. My father did not let me inside. He stood behind the screen door, one hand on the frame, as if I were selling something he had already refused. "Until you decide to act like a daughter," he said. "Don't come here pretending to be one." My mother stood behind him, crying softly. Brent looked through the living room window, saw me, and pulled the curtain shut. I walked back to my car, with the petition folded under my arm. Before I could start the engine, my phone rang. My mother's name filled the screen, then vanished. A voicemail appeared. I almost deleted it. Instead, I pressed play. Her voice came through faint and irritated, not speaking to me at all. "She'll sign once the family turns on her," Celeste said. Then my father muttered something I could not catch. My mother answered, clearer this time. "Graham said pressure works better when she feels alone." I played it again, then again. The porch light behind me clicked off, leaving my windshield dark. They thought they had finally made me alone. But my mother had forgotten to hang up, and in doing that, she had handed me the first truth her tears could not cover. The next morning, I sat across from Elias Boone with my phone on the table between us. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my mother's voice saying, I would sign once the family turned on me. Elias listened to the voicemail twice. He did not react the way I expected. He did not gasp or curse or tell me my parents were terrible people. He simply opened a yellow legal pad, drew 4 boxes, and said, "Now we organize." The first box was proof that I had helped them. Bank transfers, pharmacy receipts, text messages where my mother thanked me for co-pays and groceries, screenshots of electric bills paid from my account. Elias wrote support already provided at the top, then underlined it twice. "They are saying you disappeared," he said, "so we show the court where you were present." That sentence hurt more than I thought it would. Present. I had been present in all the boring, expensive ways nobody takes pictures of. The second box was the agreement. Elias placed the scanned copy beside my timesheet from Prairie Ridge, the 19th of May, 2026, 3:40 p.m. On the agreement, that was when I had supposedly signed. On my work record, I was clocked in. Then my supervisor sent over the safety report from that afternoon, signed at 3:46. Later, Prairie Ridge confirmed there was hallway camera footage showing me crossing into the rehab gym at 3:37. Not dramatic, not emotional. Just me in scrubs, holding a clipboard, existing somewhere Graham's paperwork said I was not. The third box was the money itself. Elias had requested itemized records, and the numbers began to lose their clean shape. Silver Hollow's charges were not $46,700 in direct care. Some were projected fees, some were administrative estimates, and some had never been finalized. The personal loan in my father's name had not gone to my mother's medical care. Part of it had moved into Brent's account within 48 hours. The credit card charges included furniture delivery, gas, and 2 payments connected to Brent's real estate licensing fees. The fourth box was pressure. That was where the voicemail went. Then came the family email, the text messages from relatives, and 3 messages from my father telling me court would teach me duty. Elias read them without changing expression. "This is not just a money claim," he said. "This is a story they built around you." I looked at the 4 boxes on his legal pad. For the first time, the chaos had corners. That afternoon, I drove to Nadine Mercer's house. She opened the door before I knocked twice, as if she had been expecting me longer than I knew. Her kitchen smelled like cinnamon tea. I told her I was sorry to drag her in. She shook her head and disappeared into the hallway. When she came back, she was holding a small plastic bag with folded notes and pharmacy slips. "Your mother asked me not to mention these," she said. "She said Leonard would be embarrassed." I looked through the slips. My name was on 2 receipts. My debit card ending in the same 4 digits, dates that matched my spreadsheet. Nadine sat across from me, her hands wrapped around her mug, knuckles white. "I thought your mother was ashamed of needing help," she said quietly. "Now I think she was making sure nobody could prove you gave it." I felt something in me settle. Not heal. Settle. There is a difference. By evening, Elias had 4 stacks of evidence on his desk. Help given. Signature impossible. Amount inflated. Pressure planned. None of it was enough to end the case that day. It was enough to change what the case was about. My parents had accused me of abandoning them. Graham had wrapped that accusation in invoices. But now the paper was beginning to answer back, and it was saying something none of them wanted the court to hear. Elias told me not to call my parents again. Not because I had nothing to say, they had already shown how to turn every conversation into a weapon. "Let them believe you are scared," he said, sliding copies of the evidence into a plain folder. "Scared people talk. Comfortable people make mistakes." I did not like the idea of looking weak on purpose. I had spent my whole life in that role. But this time, weakness was not where they had put me. It was where I let them think I was standing. 2 days later, Graham sent an email titled "Proposed Settlement Conference." He wrote that my parents were still willing to resolve the matter privately if I accepted $82,000 in responsibility and agreed to a 10-year payment plan. He called it a compassionate reduction. I stared at those words for a long time. Compassionate, from the man who had taught my mother that shame worked better when I felt alone. Elias drafted the reply in 1 sentence. "Please provide the full itemized basis for the claimed amount and all documents bearing Miss Whitcomb's signature." Graham answered faster than a careful man should have. His email arrived with 6 attachments and 1 forwarded thread he clearly hadn't meant to include. Elias saw it first. He leaned closer to the screen, then turned the laptop toward me. The message was from Graham to my father. "If she challenges the signature, remind her she signed intake paperwork at Prairie Ridge. Most adult kids won't know the difference." I read it twice. The room went very quiet around me. That sentence made me feel dirtier than the lawsuit did. Prairie Ridge was where people came after surgeries, strokes, accidents, bad falls. It was where families learned how to help someone stand again without hurting them. And Graham had looked at that world of consent forms and patient folders and seen a place to blur a signature. Elias printed the email and placed it in the 4th stack. He did not smile. Neither did I. The night before the hearing, my father called from a blocked number. I almost let it ring out, but Elias had told me to preserve everything. Leonard did not bother pretending. "This is your last chance to do the right thing," he said. "The right thing," I answered. Or the quiet thing. He breathed hard into the phone. You always thought you were smarter than this family. I looked at the folder on my table, now thick enough to hold its shape. No, I said. I just finally started reading. The next morning, they walked into court with their attorney, Graham's binder, and the practiced sadness my mother wore whenever there was an audience. Brent came behind them, jaw tight, SUV keys clipped to his belt. They thought the settlement offer had frightened me. They thought the family email had broken me. They thought the word daughter still worked like a lock. They did not know I had stopped trying to open that door. I had brought the key to another one. The hearing began with my parents' attorney telling the judge a story that sounded almost gentle if you did not know where the bruises were. He said Leonard and Celeste Whitcomb were aging adults under financial strain. He said they had tried to resolve the matter privately. He said their daughter had a stable job, no children, and the ability to contribute, but had chosen distance instead. My mother lowered her eyes at the right moment. My father stared forward like a man enduring pain with dignity. Graham sat behind them, perfectly still. Then my mother was called to speak. She held a tissue in both hands, twisting it slowly as if the truth were hidden somewhere inside the paper. I never wanted to bring my daughter to court, she said, but there are days I don't know how we'll pay for medicine. I felt Elias shift beside me, but he did not move yet. I looked at my mother's hands and remembered the receipts in our folder. Not accusations, not memories, receipts. My father spoke next. His voice filled the room more easily than mine ever had. This isn't about punishing Mara, he said. It's about responsibility. We raised her. We helped her become stable. Now we are asking her to help us survive. The words landed exactly where he aimed them. I saw one of my cousins in the back row nod before she caught herself. That was the power of my father's version. It gave people a villain without asking them to check the math. Graham testified with the calm sadness of a professional who had practiced caring from a distance. He called the agreement a standard family care document. He said the amount had been calculated from invoices, projected costs, and unpaid obligations. Then he looked toward me, not unkindly, and said, "In my experience, adult children often resist documentation because it turns emotional duties into visible ones." I wrote that sentence down. Not because it hurt, because I wanted to remember the exact shape of the lie. When it was our turn, Elias stood. He did not start with the signature. He started smaller. "Before we discuss what Miss Whitcomb refused to pay," he said, "we should examine what she already paid." He handed the clerk the first exhibit: bank transfers, pharmacy receipts, utility confirmations, copay messages. The total was $23,600. My mother stopped twisting the tissue. My father leaned toward his attorney. Graham's eyes dropped to his notes. Elias asked me one question. "Miss Whitcomb, did you provide these payments voluntarily?" I stood because sitting felt wrong. "Yes," I said. "I helped when they asked, and sometimes before they asked." My mother whispered, "Mara, please." I looked at her, not angry yet, just tired. "No, Mom. You told them I disappeared. I'm showing them where I was." For the first time that morning, the room did not belong entirely to my parents. It did not belong to Graham's binder, or my father's voice, or my mother's tears. It belonged to a stack of small, ordinary payments they had counted on no one seeing. And when the judge looked down at the receipts, my father's face changed. Not much. Just enough for me to know he understood this was only the first page. My father's attorney tried to recover by moving quickly to the agreement. He said the prior payments were generous but irrelevant. The document showed I had accepted formal responsibility on May 19th at 3:40 p.m. Graham sat a little straighter when that page came out. For the first time, I saw the shape of his confidence. He did not need my parents to look innocent. All he needed was that signature to look official. Elias stood with one sheet in his hand. Miss Whitcomb's time record from Prairie Ridge shows she was clocked in that entire day. The attorney objected that people leave work all the time. Elias nodded. as if he had expected that exact sentence. Then he submitted the hallway, still, from 3:37 p.m., me, in blue scrubs, crossing into the rehab gym with a clipboard under my arm. 3 minutes before I supposedly signed Graham's agreement 18 miles away. Graham leaned toward his lawyer. My father looked at him then, really looked at him. Elias placed the safety report beside the camera still. It had been completed at 3:46 and signed by my supervisor after a transfer went wrong. The judge read silently. My mother's tissue had gone limp in her hand. Graham said, "She may have signed earlier and misremembered." I looked at him across the room. I didn't misremember being used. Then Nadine Mercer took the stand. Her voice shook at first, but not for long. She said she'd seen me hand my mother money for prescriptions. She confirmed my mother had asked her not to mention it because Leonard would be embarrassed. Then she looked at my mother and said, "I thought you were ashamed of needing help. I didn't know you were hiding the fact that she gave it." My mother began to cry, but this time nobody moved to comfort her. Elias asked to play the voicemail. Her own voice filled the courtroom, thin and unmistakable. "She'll sign once the family turns on her." Graham said pressure works better when she feels alone. One of my cousins covered her mouth. My father slammed his palm on the table. That was private. I heard my own voice before I felt it leave me. So was my life before you turned it into a court filing. Graham tried to distance himself. He called it a misunderstanding, a family communication taken out of context. Elias opened the forwarded email next. "If she challenges the signature, remind her she signed intake paperwork at Prairie Ridge." Most adult kids won't know the difference. The room went still in a different way. Brent muttered. "Dad said it was family money." My father snapped. "Shut up, Brent." And just like that, the people who had built one story around me began tearing holes in each other's. The judge did not end the case with one dramatic sentence. Real consequences rarely arrive that cleanly. He asked for a recess, then returned with a voice that made everyone sit straighter. The agreement would not be treated as reliable evidence without further authentication. The request to hold me personally responsible for $118,400 was denied pending review of the billing records. Graham Pritchard was ordered to preserve and produce all communications related to my parents' account. His face lost its polished calm a little at a time. My father looked furious, but not frightened yet. That came when the judge ordered a breakdown of the personal loan and credit card charges tied to Brent. Brent's mouth opened, then closed. The SUV keys at his belt suddenly looked heavier than metal. My mother whispered my father's name, but he did not answer her. For the first time in my life, they were all looking at one another, instead of looking at me for the solution. In the hallway, my mother reached for my sleeve. She still had the pale blue shawl folded over one arm, the same one she had barely touched at her birthday dinner. "Mara," she said, "I never thought it would go this far." I looked at the shawl, then at her. "You sent the email to everyone except me." Her eyes filled. I was scared. My voice stayed quiet. "So was I. But I didn't use my fear to put your name on a debt." My father stepped closer. "Family shouldn't do this to family." I almost laughed, but I was too tired. "You brought me here," I said. "You don't get to be angry that I brought the truth with me." Brent mumbled that he did not know they were putting it all on me. I turned to him. "You knew money was disappearing. You just didn't ask whose name they would use when it ran out." Weeks later, the claim against me was dismissed. Silver Hollow corrected its billing. Graham's company suspended him during an investigation. Some relatives apologized. Some stayed silent. I accepted both as answers. I helped my parents find a social worker and legitimate senior support programs, but I did not pay Brent's debts. I did not sign another paper without Elias reading it first. And I stopped answering calls that began with guilt instead of hello. A letter came from Judge Rosalie Vance, a month after the hearing. She wrote that 7 years earlier, at Prairie Ridge, I had noticed what others missed and kept her awake until help came. She said kindness was not the same as surrender. I folded that letter and placed it beside my folder of receipts. Then I went back to work, helping people stand without letting them lean so hard they took me down with them. I was still their daughter. I was no longer their debt. The lesson I carried from all of this was not that family can disappoint you. Most of us learn that in small ways, long before life forces us to say it out loud. The real lesson was harder. Sometimes, the people who taught you to say love are the first ones to use it like a chain. For years, I believed being a good daughter meant absorbing whatever my parents could not carry. Their fear, their bills, their shame, their favorite child's mistakes. I thought love meant staying available. It happened even when being available slowly erased me. But love that requires you to disappear is not love. It is control wearing a familiar voice. That is something many people learn too late. We confuse loyalty with silence. We confuse forgiveness with permission. We confuse helping someone stand with letting them lean until our own knees give out. And because it is family, we tell ourselves the pain is supposed to count as duty. But real family does not need to destroy one person to rescue another. Real love does not demand forged signatures, public shame, hidden debts, or tears used as evidence. Real love can ask for help, but it does not punish you for having boundaries. I still believe in helping people. I still believe in showing up. I believe in driving someone to the doctor, paying for medicine when you can, sitting beside a hospital bed, and keeping a porch light on for someone who is trying to come home. But I also believe help should keep both people standing. If your compassion becomes the place where everyone dumps the consequences they refuse to face, then compassion has been turned against you. Healing did not mean I stopped caring about my parents. It meant I stopped handing them the pen to write my future. It meant I could love them from a distance that did not bankrupt my peace. So if this story reminded you of someone in your life, ask yourself this: are you helping out of love? Or have you been trained to feel guilty for surviving? If this story spoke to you, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and tell me where you are watching from. And if you have ever had to choose peace over guilt, I would love to hear your story.